Okay, so we'll get started, and this is being recorded. So if you do ever want to look back or check back anything that we covered today, you will be able to do so. Can I just check that you can see the slideshow there? Show of hands. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So the PowerPoint for this and the recording will both be available in our Brightspace module, which is you can self-enroll in it through the Explore tab on Brightspace, and you just need to search for UCD all student supports, and there's loads of really great resources in there. So all of our workshops go in there, but there's lots of other things there too. So it's well worth checking it out. But for this week, we'll be looking at referencing. So what we'll be looking at is exactly, first of all, what do we mean by referencing? And then what we'll cover also is plagiarism. So that's something obviously that a lot of people get very concerned about. But if you're referencing correctly, this won't be a problem. And then the other thing we'll look at then is specific referencing styles. So there's lots of different referencing styles, but generally throughout UCD, Harvard is a quite common one. You will need to absolutely double check that with your specific program. But we'll look in a little bit of detail at referencing styles, and a couple of little tools we'll just briefly mention as well that can really, really help where referencing is concerned. Now I'm just going to check. Sorry, the participant there, notation, are you PCR? Do you need me to assign you the captioning? Perhaps not. Okay, you can come back to me if that is the case. Okay, so first of all, referencing basically is that at the end of any essay that you write, you're going to be asked to include a bibliography and a reference list. So this is a list of the work that you've referenced throughout your essay. If you've used any quotations, if you've referred to evidence or statistics, you'll need to reference them and where you found them. And that will also go into your bibliography. But this also includes basically anything that you've read in terms of the research around your essay in the lead up to writing your essay and so on, all the foundational stuff that you do. So even if you haven't quoted from it in the main essay, if it's informed your argument, then it needs to go into your bibliography. So this means when you're researching your essay, it's really important from the outset to keep notes and get into the habit of writing down the publication information or saving somehow the publication information of any books that you're reading in the library, any journal articles that you're looking at online. Make sure you keep track of everything, because you don't want to get to the end when the essay is done and say, oh, now I'll create my bibliography. It would take you forever in a day. So it's all about doing it as you go along. And it's a great way to do it as well, because you're kind of keeping track of, you'll see the particular authors start to come up or articles around a particular theme. And one thing can lead to another. There's a really useful kind of phrase that's like cite forward. Oh, now I've forgotten the really useful phrase, cite forward, reference back, or something like that. So basically, when you find an article that's really on the button and is covers the kind of information that you want, you look at who they've referenced, and then you can check online who's referenced them. So you can look at both sides, basically what's informed them, their research, and then what research have they informed. And by doing that, you'll be able to really narrow down the sorry, I'm going to give you the captioning. One second now. Sorry, Anna, I nearly had you having to type up the closed captions there. So, okay, that's done. We'll have no more interruptions. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I will address them at the end as well. So yeah, it's all about keeping a detailed list as you go along rather than having to do it in retrospect. And it'll make it a lot easier then when it comes to putting your bibliography together. So when you're doing the secondary reading, so all the research that you do in order to prepare your essay or assignment. When you're checking your sources and you're doing that research, you need to get into the habit of looking at those sources critically. So when you're reading an article, try to identify and to evaluate what is the line of reasoning. So does their argument make sense? Is it adding up? Can you see where it's going? Is there a clear argument? And also try and find out maybe a bit more about the author. So don't take anything for granted, basically. Like, where does the author work? Are they based in a university? Do they work for a research lab? Who's funded the research? So obviously, if the research has been sponsored, that could inform the line of reasoning that the author would like you to take. So you need to identify that and evaluate it and make sure that, suppose, that there's no inherent bias in there. Now, this should always be flagged within the text if there is funding there, anything like that, or if there would be any kind of conflict of interest from the author's point of view. But again, no harm to kind of to double check these things, and that's what would be kind of expected at a third level. So yeah, what we mean by that is basically check their references as well. If someone is telling you a statistic, look at the methodology that they've used. There's a methodology section, in most papers. How many participants were involved? Is it enough to make it viable results? Or, is it really, if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, you should be able to rely on the fact that it's very reliable research, but still, start to look at them with a critical eye. So yeah, what is their argument? What conclusion do they want you to come to? And is there evidence there to support their claims? And sometimes you might find that you don't end up agreeing with their conclusions, but that can actually be really helpful as well. So don't dismiss it and kind of say, oh, right, that's not going to help me to put forward my argument in my essay. Sometimes it can actually serve the purpose of, you are able to say, well, here's what this person found, but here's why I think that that is wrong, that they came to the wrong conclusion, and here's why. Here's other research that actually looks at it from the other side. But by including it, it shows that you've kind of looked at the breadth of information that's available. You've considered all sides, and you still feel that what you're putting forward as your argument is correct. So just to think about, first of all, why do we need to reference other work in our essays? So research and referencing is really about putting forward your argument, but backed up by existing academic research. So that can be kind of confusing because you're being told to read the research and analyze it and then put it into your own words. But if you just put forward your own arguments in your own words without that research to back it up, it's not going to be valid. So it's about producing your own kind of hypothesis or your own argument, and then backing that up with the research and making sure that you provide the reference then for that research, so that it's clear that you're not trying to take that work as your own. And it's also clear what research you've done to arrive at your conclusions. So we'll look at this now in more detail, and we're going to look at, when should you use a direct quote? What do you need to reference? And why is it important to reference? So direct quotes are obviously when you literally take word for word, in inverted commas, a section from other work. And that, it's quite clear on that one, that needs a reference. We kind of all know that, but the way that you reference it, or the layout for that reference, might be different depending on the referencing style. The other thing to consider here is some disciplines, it's fine to use direct quotes and to use them frequently. And in others, especially in the more scientific ones, sometimes you may not use them at all, and you have to paraphrase. You have to show that you've kind of synthesized and taken that information and processed it yourself. So check that with your module coordinators. In other subjects, you might use direct quotes, but only quite sparingly. So it depends. Like, obviously in the arts, it's more common to use direct quotes. If you're referring to a piece of literature or a poem or something, it makes sense a lot of the time to use them. So do check that. If you do use a direct quote, you need to provide the page number and the details of the journal or the book where you found it. So the person basically reading your essay should be able to go and find where you found that quote, the journal or the book, turn to that page and see the quote that you've used. And the same is true of evidence, if you refer to evidence. So in the case of statistics or case studies, again, you need to be able to give the details of that study. And again, the person needs to be able to go find that and check that the evidence is correct. So paraphrase material then is where it can get a little bit trickier, because you can be unsure, how much you have to paraphrase it to make it your own, or in which, when do you still have to reference it, and so on. So when we're talking about paraphrase material, basically it might not always be appropriate to use a direct quote, like I said. And in this case, you kind of take it and make it your own. And we'll look at some instances where you might use paraphrase material now. Okay, so yeah, in terms of paraphrase material, obviously it's still important, even though you've kind of translated it into your own words, it's still important to provide that reference, because if you don't, that's where we can be verging on plagiarism. So let's look at what exactly that is. So at university level, you'll hear a lot about academic integrity. And really what we mean by that is honest, fair, and ethical research. So a big part of that is citing your sources, which is what we're looking at today. That proves that you're doing the right research, you're putting in the time, you're looking at sources. It shows that you have a breadth of knowledge of the subject. So especially as you go on throughout your degree, you'll go from quite a general knowledge of your subject area to probably getting more and more specific, right up to your dissertation. And there's no way you'll kind of reference specifically all of the reading that you do to arrive at that final kind of piece of research, or that final argument that you're putting together, but you'll still have done this massive amount of reading. So that's why the bibliography is so useful. It actually really serves to show that you're really well informed about the subject, that you've covered this very broad kind of research base, and then you've come to this specific conclusion from there, and you've used like a much more specific material within that you've actually referenced or quoted within your final piece, but you still are coming from this body of evidence. So it's really useful in that way. It in itself shows the lecturer, as much as your essay does, that you have this really thorough understanding of your subject matter. You're also then obviously acknowledging other people's work and their contributions. So you have to be sure that you cite your sources, because obviously if you don't do that, then it could seem, even accidentally, it could be interpreted that you're taking that work and passing it off as your own. So that's the other reason that you have to make sure that you've referenced. In terms of type of plagiarism, so some of it would be quite obvious. If you just literally copied a friend's essay, if you purchased an essay online, or if you ask someone else to write the essay for you, that's obviously all plagiarism, and that is quite straightforward. And hopefully, it is quite rare that actually happens, and hopefully it's not something you'd be tempted to do. But obviously when people are under pressure and so on, there's huge amounts of deadlines, it can be obviously can be tempting at some points. But please, just if that is ever the case, do reach out. Don't go down that road, because in the long run, putting the work in and learning it will actually mean that in the future essays will get easier and easier, and you will benefit so much more. Apart from obviously the question of, which is taken very, very seriously, of the academic integrity and plagiarisms and so on. So just if you ever felt you were in a boat like that, what to do is you can reach out to ourselves here in Access and Lifelong Learning. If you're struggling with kind of workload overall, you can speak to your student advisor for advice around your modules. There's the Academic Writing Centre as well, if it's a specific kind of essay question that's proven difficult, or being able to structure an essay, or how to carry out the research. The Writing Centre is fantastic for that. And then if it's kind of very subject specific issues, that is something you're not understanding, go to your module coordinators and they'll be able to help, and they'll be very open to doing that. So that is the way to go. The other type of plagiarism then that's probably more common and can sometimes be almost like accidental, it's really often down to a lack of understanding about how to paraphrase or reference correctly. And that's kind of what you call the patchwork essay. So it's when you've taken different chunks from different research and paraphrased and put it together, but not referenced it correctly. So really you're just taking different pieces of work and not making it your own. So that's why referencing and good source work and analysis really matters. It's not enough to just pull all your sources together and then say, well, that's the essay done. You need to be using them critically. You need to be interrogating them and basically using them as building blocks for your own argument or your own piece of research. So, like I say, sometimes if you just take different things from different pieces and you kind of give this general, it's a little bit like when you come to dissertation level, a literature review is where you kind of give, here's the general overview of the work that's been done in this area. That's not enough to make it an essay with your own argument. And particularly if you really don't process that and put it in your own words, a lecturer or an assessor can generally sense there's different tones and there's different styles and it doesn't flow together. So it can be quite evident that there's an element of plagiarism or a lack of kind of the student applying their own work to it and bringing their own words to it. So it's kind of like you end up with a list of research notes rather than a complete essay that has your own ideas in it. So remember that you're really using the work that you have, the research that you do, to shape and support the argument that you want to put forward. So in terms of paraphrasing, we mentioned paraphrasing earlier, and why this needs to be referenced. So in terms of when you might paraphrase, as I said, it can depend on the subject matter. It could be that you're doing it as a matter of course, or it might be specifically because you want to translate like something quite technical into simpler, more accessible language. It might be something that the lecturer requests, and this is a way they can ensure that you do genuinely understand the information that you have read. And then in terms of, say, looking at a poem or a piece of literature, you wouldn't always necessarily take a direct quote. If you're trying to discuss the imagery or a theme and so on, you might have to paraphrase to be able to make your point. So there are times that you might paraphrase. So in terms then, so that they can all kind of be liable to, if you don't do them correctly and you don't reference, it could lead to plagiarism. Which sounds very dramatic and severe, but basically what we're going to look at now is how you can make sure to avoid that. So now that we have an understanding of what it is, the first thing to do is make sure you cite all of the material you've used, and this includes your lecture notes as well. So I know I've repeated that a number of times, but this really is the thing. If in any doubt, cite it. And this is why it's so important to keep track from the outset. Have a clear understanding of what is and what isn't common knowledge. So obviously, if something is very common knowledge, you don't necessarily have to reference it because there's an assumption that we all know that. And a good rule of thumb for this is basically, would someone who isn't on my program understand this? And it's a good way to do it because it's amazing how quickly what you learn in your course seems to be common knowledge, and you can't remember, is that something I knew before I started here or not? So yeah, would a layperson understand it? And if they don't, then you probably need to provide a reference for that. Even if it's just a definition from a textbook, provide that citation. So the other things to do in order to avoid plagiarism, keep track of your electronic resources. So rather than, say, reading an article just in your browser, if it's through JSTOR, Google Scholar, or the UCD library or whatever, download the PDF, create a folder with the essay name, and keep all of the electronic readings in there, and do something similar for any paper copies that you have. If you do use, if you still use kind of hard copy, keep those all together as well. And there are, in terms of the references and that we talked about, like gathering them as you go, there are a couple of tools that make that much, much easier. So we'll touch on those briefly at the end. So keep all of your sources together. And the next tip is, don't copy and paste material directly into your work. So that might sound obvious, but even if your intention is to paste it in and then maybe paraphrase it and change some words to kind of put it together, it actually ends up being harder to do it that way, and it still is quite clear that it's generally copied. So you're better to just make it your own as a starting point. So yeah, input the material yourself, and then keep your notes and your essay drafts separate. So again, if you have all of your notes that you've gathered from your research, sometimes you can try and say, well, maybe I'll just start the essay from this document because all the notes are there. But again, it ends up being this kind of, like I've heard it described as like Frankenstein's monster, where it just sounds like other people's work all stitched together. So you're better to process all that, have that as your foundation for what you want to write, and then start your essay and just refer back to your notes. And it just keeps it really clear what's your work and what's someone else's work. Ensure that you've cited any paraphrase material explicitly. Do the referencing straight away as you're writing it. So the tool, one of the tools I'm talking about, the one that's available from UCD is called EndNote. You can download it from the software section of UCD Connect. There are guidelines on how to use it in UCD Library. If you just go to the library and search EndNote, they usually run classes on it as well. So I'm not sure if they're online, probably this year. Really useful tool. And basically you can have an add-in for Word, and as you're writing, as you're paraphrasing or bringing in a quote, you can insert your citation there and then, and it'll show up in your references list down the end, as well as being embedded into the body of the essay in whatever referencing style you need. So that's an invaluable tool. Now, I will say, while I'm mentioning it there, do double check the formatting of it, because that's the only thing. There can be little discrepancy sometimes, literally in terms of where there might be a comma and that kind of thing. But I certainly would have been lost without a referencing a citation tool like EndNote. There's other ones called Zotero, and Bibex, I think, is another. There's lots of them available, but the one through UCD is EndNote. But we'll try and have a quick look at that later if we have time. So yes, sorry, to jump back to this, add in your references straight away. Even if you don't use a tool like that, just manually put them in as you go. Don't wait and come back to it. If you have any doubt at all, either delete it or make sure and reference it. That's the kind of rule of thumb. If you don't have a reference, don't put it in your essay. If it's something that you think you might read, but you're not entirely sure, go back and do the research and find it again. That can be really annoying when you're like, I know I've come across this somewhere and I know it's a fact, but you can't find that particular paper. So that's why it's so important to keep track of them all. So in terms of clarity of your references, can the reader easily find it themselves? If they went to the library, could they find it on the page? And have you honestly included all of the material you used? Okay. So now in this is kind of our last section, looking more specifically at the Harvard referencing style. So you'll see particular examples here. So if you have a book that just has one author, you'll start with the author or editor's last name, then their initials, year, title of the book, and the edition, place of publication, and the publisher. So this is really important to include. So if you're on an arts course, say, and everyone's reading the same novel, but obviously if they're from different publishers or they're different editions, your quote, your page numbers will be different. So obviously the assessor, the lecturer, needs to know which version you're using. And in terms of book with the editor, again, you can see the example there, but just to mention as well, like I say, Harvard is the most common referencing style, I think, used in UCD, but there are other ones, and do double check, because there's APA, MLA, Chicago, Vancouver, so be absolutely sure. A lot of them are basically looking for almost exactly the same information, but it's just formatted in a slightly different way. So the important thing is basically they each have kind of style sets, and you need to be consistent with those and follow the correct style information for that referencing style. So in terms then of, say, a chapter in an edited book, so you might be reading, say, a companion or an introductory guide where each chapter has been written by a different person. So in that case, you're going to put the author and then the chapter title, the editor, and then the information about the book where you found the chapter, and then the publication details. And then at third level, of course, you'll be using a huge number of journals And the referencing changes depending on whether it's a print journal or an online journal. So that's something to be aware of. So there's an example here from a print journal, and then one for an e-journal. Now, the thing to note here when you're looking online is that in square brackets, you put the day, month, and year that you accessed it on. So obviously links can break or expire, or change over time. So it's important that you have a record of when exactly you accessed it, so that it's verifiable. In terms then of quotes, short quotes under the Harvard referencing style, you'll see here you use like a double quotation mark and you put in the year and the page number. And then for long quotes, so that would be anything pretty much over a sentence, it's a little bit different in that you indent it. So you can just obviously use the tab function in Word, and you use a slightly smaller font than the rest of your essay. So this is a good way to do it because it makes the quote obviously jump out from your own work as well. Other things to consider with quotations: if you need to leave out some words, so if you're particularly long quote and maybe there's a section in the middle that isn't relevant to what you want to say, or you're finishing it before the sentence ends, you can use the 3 dots. If there's something that wouldn't make grammatical sense when the quote is taken out of the context and put into your essay, so say for example, if it just said he, bum, 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 and you want to put in the character's name, you would do that in square brackets. And the fact that it's in square brackets shows that it's an adjustment that you've made. And in both of these cases, just be absolutely sure that you're not in any way altering the meaning of the quote. So these are some resources that are available through UCD Library. So again, kind of one about how to reference, how to avoid plagiarism, and then specific school citation styles. So that can be really useful because that's where you can find out obviously what referencing style you should use for your discipline. And I just wanted to show you very quickly, if I stop sharing there, 1 second. So there's a couple of things that are particularly useful. So one is within Brightspace, within your modules, there's a plagiarism checker. Now, I think as far as I'm aware, this has to be turned on by your module coordinator, but it's something it would be no harm to actually ask them about if they haven't already got it turned on. So you'll see here now, this is, I think, the lecturers, the faculty kind of view, but you can go into an assignment. I'm not sure exactly how it shows up for students, but you'll see here that the lecturer can turn on display. The similarity report is how it's referred to students upon submission. So that means that basically when you submit your work, you would get a score. If we take a look here, so you can see like 0% similarity. It'll basically tell you like 36% similarity, 65%. Now, when you're writing academic work, because you will be quoting from things, there will always be some level of similarity. It's not that you have to get a score of 0 or anything, but I think an average is around 35%. But again, that would be worth checking with your module coordinator, like what level is acceptable in the similarity checker. So that's why they've called it that, right? It's not that having use of, certain amount of other people's work is plagiarism. It's only when it goes past a point, obviously, or if it's not used in the correct context, or if it's not referenced properly. But basically, it's a really useful tool. So this, it can be set up different ways that you can submit. And if you see that the score is too high, because maybe you just haven't maybe paraphrased enough or whatever that might be, you can have the chance to resubmit again. So that would be worth speaking to your module coordinators about if it's not already turned on by default. Also then, here's the information about EndNote, which is the citation tool that I mentioned. And this is the information in UCD Library about how to install it and how it works. And basically then, both within, say, UCD Library or within a database, or even just on Google Scholar, if you search for a title and they come up, the little quotation here says cite. You click on that and there'll be a similar kind of, won't be exactly the same, but it'll be similar for UCD Library and so on, and different databases. There'll be some way that you can click citation or cite this article. You can then choose what referencing style it should be. So we'll go for Harvard, and then you can click on EndNote, and it will download to your computer. You open it, and you open it within the EndNote application, and it'll start to gather all of your citations together. So I'll just, if I have EndNote here, we'll see here, basically you can create different libraries. You can have a new library for and name that the name of your essay. And then you can start to add your references there. And there is actually a way to attach the PDF, so you could gather all your PDFs together. And then, as I say, there is an add-on then in Word. It's kind of like cite while you write. And as you're typing at the end of the sentence, then you click on the little add-on in Word, search for the title or the author that you want to, and you click on it, and it'll insert the citation in the correct format and add it to your bibliography. So like I say, certainly whatever about on smaller assignments and essays, that might not be necessary. But certainly as you progress throughout your degree or your master's, a tool like this is absolutely invaluable. But like I say, there's always the room for error. So do double check that your formatting is correct. It's still good to have an understanding of what the referencing style is and what the formatting is for that referencing style. But you can have obviously different libraries here for different things, or you can break it down into, have sections for different parts of your essay. There is like an extension as well for it, so you can have that in your browser, so you can just start to add things as you go along that way as well. So like I say, that's really invaluable. So that's really it for now for referencing. Like I say, feel free to follow up on those other resources, and we will be back again then next week with another topic. So take care until then, and thank you very much for coming. And check out our Brightspace module as well. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, is anyone any questions? I should have really asked that already. Perhaps not. Sorry, we've run over time a little bit. I didn't really leave. No problem at all. Okay. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.